that this house regrets the rise of social media as the dominant source of news, as called upon the Prime Minister.
As the Prime Minister of the government side, I am proud to propose to the motion that this House regrets the rise of social media as the dominant source of news. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I move on with my setup and my points, allow me to characterize a few points that government will be emphasizing on for this debate. Firstly, social media, and secondly, the dominant source of news. So, social media. In our world, social media is just like a definition of every other definition of social media. It's basically a platform in which anyone can access it and spread the news, and it can also help people keep up with status quo through the news coverage in social media. Dominant source of news in our world basically means, like for example, back then the dominant source of how news are being spread is through newspapers. But now we have moved on beyond that time, and youngsters and even adults are turning to the screens on their phones and looking at whatever is on social media, believing and conceding that it is real. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is the problem statement in our bench? So basically, the problem statement follows the status quo. Basically, every news is coming in from Facebook, WhatsApp, and etc. And youngsters and other people use it as a primary source of information. But the problem is everyone is so enclosed in their own bubble into what they want to hear, and also believing in their own opinions and their own views, that the whole world has went into a global debate, proving that their views and opinions of what is actually going on under status quo is happening really. So, ladies and gentlemen, our stance is that social media can act as a breeding ground for fake news, and the spreading of it creates enclosed groups and bubbles and filters balanced views of an event. Hence, we detest and wish to announce social media as the dominant source of news. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin with my speech. I have 2 points to present to you today, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair. Firstly, how enclosed bubbles will lead to a never-ending debate. And secondly, why anyone can share the news and how this spreads the danger of fake news. So, allow me to begin my speech. So, why is enclosed bubble dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair? It is because, ladies and gentlemen, when in the limelight on the platform of social media, not everyone can get away with it. We concede to it. We tend to listen to the news that we need to hear. But some people are desperate for social media to tell us what we want to know instead of telling us what we needed to know about the world, giving us a fair reason on what it is actually like. No, sit down. So no, we detest this, and we are going against that. Social media creating enclosed bubbles is wrong. There is no denial that each and every one of us picture a crystal clear world, a perfection of a best case scenario of what the world can actually be. A world without corruption, a world without evil, you name it. A world in our own making. And the thing is, like for example, I am racist, right? And I detest the African American movements. And then there is this one group in this social media platform that detest and denounce them for standing up for the African Americans. So obviously, according to my principles and according to my prejudices, it is obvious that I will subscribe to this group and I'll listen to news only based on their beliefs and on their perspectives and on their points of views, hence deteriorating my ability and my potential to be an average or reasonable individual. No, thank you. Please sit down. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we become obsessed with the groups we want to listen to, if we become obsessed with the group that we concede to and we want to side with, then what kind of people would we become, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair? Basically, we would become people who won't be average anymore. We won't be the reasonable people. We won't be the one who could stand in the middle and then just hear the opinions of both sides and decide which is right or wrong. We are basically, through this social media platform, taking one side and then deciding that that side is correct, definitely. It is like, for example, average people as like the adjudicator, Madam Chair. We listen to the points and the reasons made by the government and the opposition, and we decide on who is right and who is wrong. But the problem is this social media platform creates a sense of biasness that if I join this side, then definitely I believe that this side is standing for the right thing. I believe that this side is standing for the right thing that the world should believe in, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair. Hence, it deteriorates their potential to become average and reasonable people. No, thank you. Please sit down. So, ladies and gentlemen, one most obvious example of this is the Shakespearean Wars. No doubt you have heard of it, ladies and gentlemen. It is a debate between a group of people called the Stratfordians and a group of people called the anti-Stratfordians. So basically the Stratfordians agree and they believe that Shakespeare wrote the works and the works of Shakespeare are authentic, whereas the anti-Stratfordians believe that the Shakespeare works were written by another man and not Shakespeare. You see, ladies and gentlemen, ever since the 19th century itself, the debate has been going on and on and on, and this conflict has not been resolved at all. There has been no solution, and the debate keeps on going on and on. And as time passes, we'll keep on hating each other and we keep on despising each other because their views are different from us. It is because their prejudices are different from us. We take pride in our own prejudices and we take pride in what we believe in, ladies and gentlemen. And that would be the downfall if social media remains as a dominant source of news. No, thank you. So the next point is anyone can share the news and the rumors will spread like a wildfire. So, ladies and gentlemen, this will be a point that will be briefly elaborated. First of all, allow me to restate my definition of social media as a platform that anyone can access to, meaning that anyone can spread any news that they want and then they'll just share it because they just like sharing it for some reason whatsoever. And then eventually people start taking the news that they share seriously, and then we would start believing and conceding that this might be true, and then the world out there might be violent. Like, for example, I post a fake news that there is a riot going on in Shah Alam because Pakatan won and not BN. And then people will start to think, what kind of people would want to go with BN? And then they will immediately go against Shah Alam. This will create a confusion, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair. This will create an element of confusion between the two sides. And then it'll be just another thing for us to worry about, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair. Hence, what have I brought to you today, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair? That first of all, social media puts us in enclosed bubbles and it prevents us from hearing the views of the outside world. Secondly, anyone can share the news. Anyone has the access to share the news, and then these rumors could spread like wildfire, hence leading to the point of fake news, which will be elaborated by my second speaker. So as the Prime Minister of the government bench, I would like to propose to the motion that this House regrets the rise of social media as the dominant source of news, and I am proud to propose.
Thank you very much. The Prime Minister has the
It is interesting to note that throughout his entire speech, the Prime Minister never once mentioned the forms of media that were dominant before social media took center stage. That is going to be the focus of side opposition argument as to why social media is not inherently worse than other forms of media. In fact, it is much better. Firstly, on the whole idea of echo chambers and being stuck inside bubbles where you don't hear other people's opinions. We think that this is not exclusive to social media. In fact, we think that it happens a lot more in traditional, more passive forms of viewing media. Say, for example, newspapers or subscribing to TV channels to watch news on the TV. We think that it's much more likely that you're going to be stuck inside an echo chamber if you just subscribe only to the newspapers that you want to read and watch the news channels that you want to watch. Say, for example, you're a pro-government supporter, so you read government news. Or say, for example, you're like an opposition supporter, so you read opposition newspapers and whatnot. We think that because of this, we think that the harm of having an echo chamber and the harm of having your ideas reinforced and your beliefs reinforced by people and only seeking out news that you like is not a harm that is exclusive to social media. They have failed to prove to us why it's exclusive to social media when this effect can be seen throughout all other forms of media throughout history. We think that seeking out news that affirms your belief is just a symptom of being human. Second, on the idea that for everyone, we think that second on the idea of the ideal world. The ideal world as defined to us was a world in which everyone is so-called average and everyone somehow listens to both sides of an argument. But we don't think it's necessarily a harm if people only listen to one side of an argument. We don't see why, say for example, if you're a person of color, you need to listen to people arguing as to why you should die and why why your race is inferior to theirs. We don't think necessarily that two sides of an argument are always equally correct. We think this is a false fallacy, and we think that people should not be under an obligation to have to force themselves to listen to news that force themselves to listen to people that racists that tell them to kill themselves, or people should not be forced to listen to news that makes them very offended because it goes against their religious beliefs, for example. We don't think that people should be forced under a so-called ideal world to subscribe themselves to two extremes of a spectrum because that somehow makes them reach the optimum average person. We don't think that's necessarily how news or opinions work. We think that it's totally fine if people want to close themselves off in bubbles, because we think that at the end of the day, we think it's up to that person to decide what they want to view anyways, because we think that if a person is someone who does not seek out opposing views, we don't think that necessarily the lack of social media would have made them seek out opposing views anyways. We think if someone, say for example, only subscribes to viewing news that they like, that probably just shows that that person is afraid of having their beliefs challenged. We don't necessarily think such people, if there was no social media, would have their views challenged in other ways, and these people are less likely to do so. However, and this moves on to some of the exclusive benefits of the use of social media and news on our side, we think that one way in which social media, and this positive material, we think one way in which social media is better exclusively than traditional media is the engagement that you get. They brought up how social media can be used by anyone to post whatever you want. We think that that's a great thing. We think that the ability to be able to hear other people's opinions and the ability to see opinions and comments from millions of people on a Facebook post or a Reddit link, for example, we think that that's something great that social media has created. That is much better than, say, for example, more traditional passive forms of media like TV or newspapers. We think the ability to share in a discussion along with everyone around the world and for everyone to share their opinions means that you are much more likely to encounter opinions that go against yourself. And we think that that's much more that your harm is much more likely on your side, where you only so-called want traditional media. Sure, we've already conceded to the fact that yes, echo bubbles do exist. We think that of course there will always be people that still live in their own echo chambers, in their own bubbles. But we think that at the very least, under our side, if a person does want to go out and use social media to find other opposing beliefs if one day they have a change of heart, we think it's much easier for them to find opposing beliefs and different beliefs from everyone if they so want to on social media rather than traditional media. Because if your definition of how you win this debate is by proving that a person can get the most balanced viewpoints, we think that that's more likely on social media. That's much more likely on social media rather than on traditional media, because social media is a lot more accessible. We think that at the click of a button, you can access hundreds of thousands of different websites. You can see different viewpoints. Traditional media normally requires a paywall. You need to pay to subscribe to channels. You need to pay to subscribe to newspapers. You need to buy magazines. We think that this prevents people from accessing different viewpoints because it's quite costly. Also, it's very hard to carry 50 magazines around when it's easy to just have your phone in your pocket. We think that because of that, social media makes it more accessible. Social media makes more being exposed to more opposing views easier, and therefore we think that the idea that it does not encourage it somehow creates echo chambers is completely false, because we think that yes. Anyways, moving on from that, about how about the whole fake news thing, and about how because people can post whatever they want, that means that there's going to be a lot of fake news. Well, we think that that's two levels of analysis as to why this is not a big harm in today's society. First level of analysis, fake news, on how the impact of fake news is already lessened under what we already have on the internet. Because just because a lot of people can contribute to one thing doesn't mean that immediately falsity start spreading. Because we see, for example, Wikipedia, where anyone can contribute to Wikipedia article. That does not mean that Wikipedia is an inherently worse source of information than, say, for example, Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a published book. In fact, we think that because social media, anyone can comment on something. Say, for example, let's take your example of riots in Shah Alam and how people were spreading fake news about riots in KL. We think that one quick way to shut that down would be just have people, because on a post where it says people in KL are rioting, you could have someone who actually lives in KL comment and say, I'm in KL where this is supposed to be happening, this doesn't actually happen. Fake news gets shut down faster on the internet than on any other medium because of the fact that people can comment on whatever they want. And it is not caused by the fact that people can comment on. Furthermore, we think that fake news is much more preferable to the alternative. We think that the possibility of fake news is much more preferable to the alternative of what we have in today's society with traditional media. And the alternative would be government suppression and control of media by a few powerful people. We think that it's okay to deal with fake news because by now people on the internet have learned how to think about articles with critical thought and question whether things are actually real, rather than say, for example, in the days when you had no other news source except for government news supplied to your doorstep, we think that it makes it much harder for critical thought to happen. It makes it much easier for false news and fake facts to spread simply because people did not question whatever was put in front of them, as there was no access to other facts. We think that for that reason alone, we have disproven their harm of echo chambers. We have disproven the harm of fake news. For all those reasons, side with side opposition, because side opposition fights for a freer media.
Thank you very much to the leader of opposition and inviting everyone this.
Side opposition provided us with a brilliant case for a fictitious world. They believe in a world in which people are able to discern things just because they receive an education. They're able to tell between fake news and what is real. We think all these sorts of assumptions are unfounded, and we want to stand with what status quo looks like. What does status quo actually look like? People surround themselves with only the people whom they want to hear. They surround themselves with the news that they want to hear. That is, a white supremacist would only listen to a news source such as Breitbart, whereas someone who is more liberal only subscribes to BBC and CNN. We think this is the distinction that side opposition has failed to recognize, that all this news that comes from social media is only there because you yourself have chosen it. Social media, this is why we have stated through our stance that social media can act as a breeding ground for fake news and the spreading of it, as well as filtering out the amount of balanced views of an event. We would like to emphasize on the fact that social media is not well-rounded. Why? Because all this news that they see, all the news that they see is all from what they subscribe to on Facebook, what they follow. That is why, for someone like me, I don't get Al Jazeera or RT News filling my inbox because all I see is BBC or CNN. This is a distinction that side opposition needs to take into consideration. Before I proceed with my substantives, a few pieces of rebuttals. Firstly, they say that echo chambers are not unique to social media, and we concede to this because we know that people are still will also be able to subscribe to only Breitbart or listen to more supremacist views and that such. But we think that on our side, we're doing a much better job for people. Why? Because social media is a very active breeding ground for echo chambers. What does this mean? There are many groups set up on Facebook or Instagram in which people are able to only enclose themselves in these groups. Whereas when you see, say, newspapers and things like that, the views are much more open. Even though you only read from one news, although you only read from Breitbart or you only read from CNN, there's still a vast array of views that they provide you. We think it is much, the harm is much greater on their end when they're saying, when they're telling us that there also exist echo chambers in social media groups, because in on the social media platforms, these sorts of echo chambers are much more prevalent. I'll continue to elaborate on this in my substantives. Secondly, they tell us that it is not a harm if you only listen to one side of an argument. We think this is something that that is quite, in a way, scary coming from side opposition, to tell us that you're okay if you only surround yourselves with the views that you want to hear. We think that in our world, we're providing people with a more balanced view. That is, we want them to listen to the actual facts that have been vetted out through a newspaper. Because something that they need to recognize is that on social media, you can basically post anything you want unless it is affiliated with some crime as horrible as terrorism. Will Facebook actually ban the post? Thirdly, they tell us that Wikipedia is just as valid as Encyclopedia Britannica. This should not be a rebuttal, but I think that the educated can recognize why this is not the case, and this is why schools always tell us don't use Wikipedia. It is a site that can be abused by anyone. Now, into my substantives. Firstly, how social media acts as a breeding ground for fake news. Firstly, what we need to understand is that on social media platforms, it is so easy to click the share button. That is, once you click it, it goes all around the internet. And social media is, for that reason, inherently biased. And because people know it can spread like wildfire, this is why people such as Kanye or people such as Trump, they post things that may not even make factual sense because they want to become famous or trendy. But people who idolize them, people who idolize such celebrities, even if they spread fake news, people won't be able to discern it because they are so caught up in this echo chamber where they idolize, say, Kim Kardashian or Kanye West so much to the point where whatever they say, the people will follow. Now, we need to look at the very major distinction that exists with more traditional news sources compared to social media. That is much more vetting for something such as newspapers. That there are much more editors that actually go into the process of looking at the news and seeing, is this right? Is this wrong? Whereas on social media, practically the only form of vetting that happens is yourself, and if what you post is too much of a criminal act, that Facebook will actually intervene. We think this is very dangerous. And now going into my second point about how information is filtered by social media and the user. Not only can we be subject to biases and prejudices, but we think that social media can also be like that. That is that Facebook bans certain channels. And we know this after Mark Zuckerberg was accused after his hearing of banning several Republican channels because he was in a way supporting the Democrats. Of course, there may be rumors on this sort, but it is very obvious to see how that direction might take. That social media, this is why we see things such as election scandals when social media groups like team up with the government to try and only censor the news so that people can only see what's good about the existing government and what is bad with the opposing government. We think this is very dangerous for society when even the social media platforms themselves are acting against the people. That is, they are filtering information that the people could potentially be convinced by. And we think that this ultimately, what does this do to the people? And we definitely need a response from side opposition on this. That it deprives people of the ability to discern and consider. When you're stuck in these echo chambers, which are more prevalent on social media accounts than any other platform, say whether it be documents or a newspaper, it strips away people's abilities to be able to discern what is true, what is false. We think this is very dangerous for society in a sense that because people are always stuck there and listening to the same rhetoric all day long, we think that in further down the road, they will be in a way delusionized and there will be an illusion cast upon them. Now, I think in summary of what I said, I think the most important thing that side opposition needs to take into consideration is how this debate is characterized. That is that this news can be created by anyone, posted by anyone, you or I. It can be posted by CNN as from their official news channel, but it can also be posted by me. It can be shared by people without any sort of check and balance system. This is something that we need to recognize. And because on side government, what we are fighting for is a world in which we are able to discern news. We want to stick to more traditional platforms because we think the best source of balanced news comes from there.
Thank you very much. But the yellow.
Side proposition has essentially wasted 14 minutes of their life trying to explain to us why essentially the harms of social media and why the harms of it being a dominant force of news is a bad thing, right? But we see that all those harms they brought up isn't mutually exclusive to social media. However, we believe that it exists also in traditional media, in the forms of newspaper, in the forms of magazines, right? You see that when side government comes forward and tells us about things like fake news, they come forward and tell us things about echo chambers and how that is exclusive to social media. We see that that is not true. You have examples like Fox and Friends, right? Where they have pundits like Sean Hannity saying that, oh, Trump is a great man, he is not a racist, he is not a bigot, even when there is proof out there that shows that he is one, right? And so therefore, the term fake news that they're trying to tell us isn't mutually exclusive on our side. We see that it happens even more on side government because there is a lack of regulation within it. Because we see that the benefit of social media is that many people can contribute to it. Many people can voice their opinions. And when many opinions are heard, and because social media is free, it's more accessible, therefore, more opinions are heard. Therefore, fake news is taken down more easily.
Whereas if you have like a newspaper you subscribe to or a TV channel that you pay to subscribe to, you only listen to that one source. You only listen to Fox and Friends. You only listen to the BBC. You only listen to TV1, for example, right? And you only listen to this point of view. Whereas on site opposition, where we have social media, which isn't paid for, you can get it for free. It is so easily accessible. It was one press of a button, you can see so many views, right? And so when site government comes forward trying to tell us that social media is creates echo chambers, they're trying to tell us that social media spreads fake news. We said that it's completely the opposite, and however occurs more on their side, where you have people, where you don't see white supremacists subscribing to news that is supportive of people who aren't white, where you don't see white supremacists subscribing to news which is in support of Latinos, where you don't have white supremacists subscribing to news which is supportive towards Black people, right? And so, therefore, the case so far has failed. They've told us that they've given us this weird example of a Shakespeare war, and how they're like, Shakespeare wrote all these plays, Shakespeare wrote all these sonnets, and other people like, Shakespeare didn't write these sonnets. But the thing with that is that it happens in traditional media too. You have historians arguing about it. You have people studying English literature who argue about this as well, right? It's not mutually exclusive to social media. It in fact happens in traditional media as well. It happens to everyday people as well, right? They've tried to contrast the BBC and Al Jazeera, where Al Jazeera is one of the most liberal media sources in the Middle East. They are one of the most objective media sources in the world, and therefore the contrast doesn't stand. They told us that Wikipedia can be abused, but the thing is that the other users on the site act as check and balances to ensure that the fake news doesn't stay there, to ensure that those false facts do not stay there. And so therefore the social media there doesn't really have a problem. And so what are we trying to tell you on site opposition, right? Our burden of proof is to tell you that social media as the dominant source of news is actually beneficial to our society. It's beneficial to our way of life. It's beneficial to the people who live around the world, and it's in fact beneficial in our daily life, right? Because when side government comes forward and tells us that people shouldn't listen to social media because social media subjects them to echo chambers where they only listen to one point of view, they are therefore suggesting that a Black man be listening to a wide range of sources, whether it be white supremacists constantly bashing them. We see that we should not have people subject to people hating on them, and therefore we see that even if echo chambers exist on our side, we see that they aren't that bad in the first place, right? And so on side op, what is my point, right? Is that social media is able to spread these messages faster. Take the Arab Spring, for example, in 2010, where you had a man confronting the government of Tunisia, saying that the government wasn't good enough. He killed himself and people posted it all over Twitter. It went viral. Next thing you know, there were governments and dictators being overthrown all across North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. And we see that it's through the use of social media that changes happen. It is through the use of social media that all these changes were able to occur. It is through the use of social media that progression did happen. Whereas if you had, let's say, a very conservative news source from, let's say, Egypt, for example, right, where you have the government controlling the media, or if you want to use this example of Al Jazeera, for example, where it's controlled by the Qatari government, we see that there are these government-controlled media, whereas on social media, the government doesn't control it. The government doesn't control the post. The government doesn't control what you post. However, if you have a newspaper where you have the government constantly controlling what is allowed to be posted, like from Malaysia, for example, right, where you had the 1MDB scandal, and Malaysian newspapers and news sources weren't allowed to post about it, and people only found out about it until it came out in the New York Times. That is a perfect example of how traditional media is actually worse off to the world than social media, because social media allows for the expression of many points of views. Social media is essentially uncensored, right? Where you have sites like Twitter who dedicate themselves to free speech. Even when it comes to hate speech, they still allow the free speech because it allows a wider platform of views for people to understand each other, for people to communicate. And even if there is discourse created, that is a good thing, right? Because we see at the end of the day, there is conversations happening. People are talking more about these issues that are pressing, right? Any POIs before I continue? No? Okay. And so what have we told you on side opposition so far today? Is we've told you that not all news outlets are objective, where you have many news outlets paid for and sponsored by a government, where you have news outlets that are where you have news outlets that are exclusively supporting one side of a view, right? And we've told you that anyone can reach on social media, and that is not a bad thing. It is in fact a benefit of social media, where people can counter other fake news views that are out there, and therefore it cancels out the harms that are brought up. We've told you that the harms brought up by side proposition about our case is not mutually exclusive to us. However, it happens to them as well on an even higher level, right? And we've told you that social media is able to act change even faster because news is more quickly spread, news is more widely spread. And therefore, social media as the dominant source of news is not a bad thing after all. And with that, I'm proud to oppose.
Thank you very much to the Deputy Leader of Opposition and to the Vice Leader of
It is rather amusing for side opposition to say how precisely echo chambers and fake news isn't usually exclusive to social media, when literally both of these things are most common in this particular foundation. So under this particular debate, there are multiple questions that need to be answered as the whip of your government side, I'm actually going to answer these questions and prove to you how precisely the answers eventually lean towards our side. But let's begin with addressing a few arguments that side opposition here has made. So the leader of opposition has actually said that the people can share their own news. The fact that people can share their own news is actually a good thing, simply because they post their own opinions. But Madam Chair, it's rather curious to see how precisely the idea of sharing opinions actually works. Because what they claim is that eventually people will see these particular views and they will come to talk about it and see the other side of the story in the end. But rather, this isn't what's going to happen in their world. If you say it aloud, the idea that people will look at the other side of the argument in such a world where they are proposing is literally a very minuscule chance. Let's take a look at what will happen under their world. First of all, because of social media going around, the already set stance of people on one particular event is going to be embedded in their minds even more, simply because of the number of articles that they subscribe to. Basically, the idea of echo chambers. Second of all, both sides of the argument will take to the streets and eventually post their own point of view in every particular thread that they find on social media. Eventually, but Madam Chair, this won't spark any particular conceding. This won't spark us constructive arguments. This is going to do the exact opposite. Because the moment that social media solidifies your stance in terms of how precisely you look at something, it is eventually going to lead you to argue even more. The moment that the moment that a BN supporter comes up and tells a Pakatan supporter that BN is better, the Pakatan supporter eventually will argue in terms of both particular sides, and it will end up in a heated argument, and no particular constructive conversation is eventually going to happen in the end. And this is basically what's going to happen in their world, and not our world, where social media doesn't really have much of a chance to basically increase the chances of such a horrible situation happening. Second of all, the deputy leader of opposition has said how precisely the bias is rare as the government controls each newspaper organization. But let me tell you something, Madam Chair. Not all newspaper organizations are actually controlled by the government. There are independent organizations that are still out there, like the Star, and they are basically independent. They can post this news that they basically want, and eventually this opens more doors in terms of how precisely they're going to launch more bias in terms of the ways that they are going to put it in social media. Have a seat, sir. So basically, this is how I responded to the arguments. Let's move on to answering a few of the questions. Before I begin, let me just clarify the stance we're trying to prove here. Basically, our stance is how social media can act as a breeding ground for fake news, and eventually the spreading of it, as well as filtering of a balanced views of an event. Summarized, basically, simply put, social media has brought towards a chaotic world in terms of the news platforms. So let's face it, people out there are actually fighting over politics, the world, and others simply because of their clashing points of view on something like an event or a political stance. It's about time to look at the things that are feeding the fire and eventually come to look at how we should precisely stop it and why we do not like it at all. So The particular question I'm going to be answering today and how precisely both sides have responded to this issue is basically which one serves which one serves less echo chambers and more information, a more informed society where people learn more about the world. So Side government has brought to you quite a lot of things actually. We have already proven to you multiple things. First of all, how people eventually subscribe to the news channels that they want and not necessarily need. Second of all, how fake news exists. And while it may be taken down and while it may have been worked out to be taken down, we cannot deny that people have already seen it, just like many other fake news articles out there. And third of all, I'm going to show you how people can manipulate the news in terms of how. And third of all, we've told you how people can manipulate the news to solidify their own stance on this particular event, which will lead us to a more disorganized world. Before I move on to what opposite, yes, I'll take first.
Prove to us how echo chambers don't happen under your side when traditional media is also based on subscription and is also based on what you want to see. How is that any different from social media?
Madam Chair, because first of all, we have to take a look at the things that happen out there in the world. Because you have to understand, while social media is the predominant way for you to share the news eventually, we have to understand traditional news is eventually still used out there in the world. But literally, while those things actually happen, we concede to it. We have to understand that side opposition's world gives you one more foundation to base this entire problem off. While our world may have just one minor problem on how echo chambers exist in the traditional ways of using it, they have two particular foundations for you to take this problem into place. First of all, social media. Second of all, the traditional strategy in terms of how you spread this particular news. So when you take it into a comparative between both sides, you are eventually going to see how our world is more of a feasible way for you to eventually reduce these echo chambers and these particular things when these are and fake news, when these things are so common in terms of social media as well. So that's how I respond to your POI. So let's move on to our opposite. All op has brought in terms of a response to that is they exist, but they exist within within other foundations too. But the thing is, this is the worst form of rebuttal that you could ever come up with. As I already responded in the earlier POIs, this literally gives you one more foundation to base off the whole problem. Since I've already explained it, let's move on to the next one. He said about how one click of a button, and with one click of a button, all the views come to the screen and they come forth with the articles. But of course, we've already shown you how this one click also opens many doors and also opens many articles for you to see fake news that have not been taken down, which other people would have seen before it's taken down. And second of all, biased articles, which are actually kind of inevitable in social media, and they have shown you how the biased views of the authors are out there. So with one click of a button, this does not bring you more beneficial articles. It does not bring you more beneficial essays. It brings to you bias. It brings to you harm. And overall, under ops narrative, they throw every constructive way out of a debate to be thrown out of the window and eventually each side will argue in their own world without any knowledge of the other party. With that, go with side government because we bring to you balance and a better world.
Side government's entire case is basically built around two main points: echo chambers and the breeding ground of false news. Now, if side opposition is able to deconstruct those two cases, we win the debate. Simple as that. So first off, a breeding ground of fake news. My first and second speaker has constantly came up and already explained to you how it will never happen on our side for three simple reasons. First off, common sense. Every human being on this planet has common sense. When they come face to face with fake news, it's obvious that they will be able to differ which is true, which is false. But fine, even in the case they aren't able to differentiate which is true, which is false, they still believe there are other things like discussion in social media nowadays, right? Like my first speaker has already said, social medias are open to anyone to look, to read, and to comment on it, right? So if there is news or rumor that is particularly false and people are believing in it, they believe this opens up more doors for people to explain and tell that person why it's untrue. Whereas on the other side, when you have traditional media outlets like what side government is going for, you are unable to do this simply because your media outlet is not open enough to as many people, right? When you premise yourself around one single news, what you are is limited to what you can expose to, right? You have no one else to spark discourse with. You have no one else to discuss a certain topic with, simply because you're unable to connect with other people around the world. You're unable to connect with the other million people around the world and discuss with them, and thus losing your second set of defenses against fake news. Thirdly, there are regulations and laws in place regarding fake news on social media or internet as a whole, right? Like, there are many governments and status quo who will find people, who will jail people if they do spread, if they are a notorious source, a legit source of false news. These are liable for legal action, and we believe there's enough deterrence for people to spread fake news, right? In terms of rumors, we believe that will exist no matter what. Rumors is a thing of everyone, and we don't necessarily think it's exclusive towards our side. Now, secondly, the much awaited discussion of echo chamber. This has been thrown around like continuously between both sides. And let me, as the web speaker of side opposition, sum it up to you and explain why we want the case over. So, side government comes up and insists that echo chambers are only common and are only exclusive towards our side. We beg the pardon, right? For three reasons actually. First off, echo chambers can exist in traditional media outlets as well. Let me explain it to you in two levels of analysis. First off, traditional media outlets such as newspapers or TV news channels especially are heavily regulated by governments. The third speaker of government is a perfect example of a person who lives in a world where they believe Star is a liberal news source, right? That's not the truth of today's society. Imagine Star writing an article about how BN was a complete nonsense. It's really bad at BN when BN was still in power, right? The next thing you know, Star would obviously be closed down. No newspaper article would dare voice out liberal opinions against their own government, knowing the fact that they have the chance of being shut down by the government, right? This problem exists when you're only limited to traditional media outlets heavily regulated by the government. So the problem with this is, like I already explained, you don't get discourse, you don't get discussion simply because you have no one else to create discussion with, because there is no other news source, because they're all regulated by the government and all get the same news. And second problem with traditional news outlet is the fact that it's highly you have less sources, right? It's known when your certain source of information only comes from one person or like one company, one big company, it's never a good thing. This is simply because you're unable to check. You don't have any check and balances, as my second speaker has already said, right? When your entire life is based around news of a single government or a single government body, the problem with this is you're not exposed to as many things. So if you want to go to another more liberal view, like if you want to open your mind to more opinions, you're unable to do that simply because you can't connect to other people of the world. For instance, you're in Malaysia right now, and you want to know the truth, the honest truth of what's happening in America, not something that's completely blocked out by the government, not something regulated by the government. That cannot exist under their side simply because traditional outlets are restricted by governments, right? So right now, people in Malaysia are unable to connect with the truth in America because whatever thing they ask on social media is really being shut down by side government's proposal. That's the harm that we do not want in today's debate. Before that, a quick one.
The way that people eventually communicate with fake news out there against people who actually believe it is eventually, most commonly, people who say this is fake news. What particular discourse do you expect to come out from these particular comments?
Okay, we believe that. Fine. Imagine, picture a world where you have a white supremacist right here, and he goes on social Facebook and say white people are the best. No matter what you say, white people is the best. You are going to get discourse simply because people from another end, people who believe in other opinions, come in and say, no, that's not true. You get this discourse because people are able to compete with one another on social media. Let's say traditional media outlets. Let's say, for example, your newspaper come and say, white people are the best. What discourse are you going to have then? No one's going to say, oh, white people are not the best, not the best. Because they have no other source to rely on. They have no other source of evidence. Simply because the only evidence is the traditional media outlets, which is very heavily regulated by the government. Thus, only one source, as I said previously. Secondly, why do we think that echo chambers are the outlets, at least under their side? So the main question is today is echo chambers, right? This is really achieve only when this particular oversight from the government. It's kind of easier to open up on the outside, right? So social media, like I said, but they were able to listen from everyone around the world. That's why the right one, right? Let's say it does find you wouldn't want to anything else except believe in their side. Because it is passive. They can't interact with it. Just sitting there watching their TV, believing. Whereas social media, they constantly saying, oh, this, more open with it, more serious, and more able to help you become more reasonable and get you that check and so that's really under your side. So the main so one of the best case scenario on the website, right? In their best case scenario, what they get at every day is people being certain number of people being able to people just might be able to get news truthfully from unbiased sources. Because as you know, traditional media outlets are heavily biased amongst a certain company. But at least enough our side, even the worst case scenario, the echo chambers still have the rumors are still spread. At the very least, discourse is still happen. And this discussion is a necessary check and balance we need to take this goal, right? For those people out there who are able to differentiate news, true news and fake news, discussion and socializing with other people is the pure necessity you need into staying reasonable and staying sane in this goal with so many rumors and so many things being spread. So if you want society where people are actually having check and balances, when these people are actually being able to be reasoned with, we cite opposition as we bring to you the solution towards people being hidden in echo chambers. We give you the solution to liberating these people who are confined within their conservative selves and unable to trust others.
Thank you very much to the opposition. We'd like to invite the opposition back.
The two main issues in today's debate were about echo chambers and fake news. So first, about echo chambers. There are two types of people in today's society. People who like having their views challenged and people who don't. Here's why we serve both of them better. People who like having their views challenged are going to actively seek out different opinions and different news sources. They're going to be ones who are going to participate more in discourse. As we have already established, social media grants you more options. Social media grants you more news. Social media grants you more opinions from everyone around the world. We think that this makes open-minded people more likely to be able to hear more opinions, to be able to hear about more variety of opinions, and to be able to engage in discussions with people all around the world. They never really disproven this fact, and so because of that, we win on the idea of open-minded people challenging their beliefs, because under our side, we have proven to you today that we can get valuable discussion from social media, and from this valuable discussion, we can get people challenging the beliefs and change their mind. Second, on close-minded people, we think that close-minded people will always be close-minded people, and if someone is set their heart out on never changing their opinion, we don't think any amount of exposure to opposing views will change that. Furthermore, we think that the creation of close-minded people who only want to listen to news that they like is not necessarily a harm that comes only on our side. We think that this is a harm that happens on their side as well. They never really explained how, under their side, traditional media somehow doesn't create this, because we have already said that traditional media is just like social media, except that it's less, but it's a subscription-based service, so you get even less information, you get even less viewpoints. You think that echo chambers still form there. We think that their explanation about traditional media versus social media about different viewpoints was that, because somehow when you have a choice between social media and traditional media, now there's more fake news because there's two medias instead of one. We don't think that's a really good example or a good explanation, because if at the same time there's just as many valid viewpoints as there are fake news, we think that just proves to you that the creation of social media means that you get to listen to more news and means that you get to listen to more views. Second, lastly, on the idea of fake news and false rumors and whatnot, we have already proven to you how these false rumors and fake news are more quickly disproven on the internet than on other traditional media sources. Because when these false news articles are posted out, more people can engage with them, more people can say that, no, this is not true, here are like sources citing why. We think that makes fake news less likely to spread on social media. We've already proven to you how just because something is regulated by the government, or just because something is an established media company, does not mean that it's necessarily 100% true. Because of that, we think that fake news, while it happens on both sides of the argument today, we think that we've also already proven to you how fake news is much more harmful on their side, because on their side, fake news is much harder to challenge as there are less media sources. Fake news is much harder to correct, and fake news does a lot more damage when misinformation and fake news does a lot more damage when there's only one media source that people can listen to. We think that because of this, we win today's debate, because under our side, we have proven to you why echo chambers, even if they do happen on our side, are not mutually exclusive as a harm. Even on why on our side we have more access to different opinions, why under our side the idea of fake news is not necessarily that valid, and they have never really taken down all our positive material as well. Positive material like how we've proven to you about the connectivity and accessibility and availability of the internet and social media has helped create more informed individuals. We never disproven how any of the benefits that come with social media necessarily are outweighed by the harms. We think that because of that, side opposition takes today's debate because side opposition has shown to you that in reality, social media is the greatest thing to happen to news ever since the newspaper was invented. And because of that, we think that side opposition takes today's debate.
Thank you very much to the opposition reply. To invite the government.
On side government, today we are trying to reform status quo as it is. That is that people are gullible and people listen to fake news. They're stuck in their own echo chambers and they are unable to get external help. We think that on side opposition, they are coming from a very fictitious viewpoint where they're making many assumptions and assertions such as that people will be able to make their own, that they will be able to discern between what is real and fake. I would like to pose this question, which should be the what assesses this debate today. Which side can better ensure a balanced news platform? One that is healthy, one in which people will be able to know what is right and what is wrong. Firstly, I would like to start off by saying that we think on side government that the opposition has misunderstood many of the things that we have said. Firstly, they keep accusing us of and saying that having echo chambers and fake news is not mutually exclusive to only social media. And we have already conceded to this since second speaker and have said that, yes, it is not mutually exclusive. However, it is much more prevalent in social media pages. And why is this? I have already told you in my second speech and my third speaker has already elaborated that this is because it is so much easier to spread information. People want to spread information because they know that they can become hot and trendy, and people will just spread it for the sake of gaining whether it is whatever personal agendas we have. We have already told you that we have conceded to the fact that there will exist echo chambers even with traditional news medias, but it will be much worse off in your world. Secondly, let's look at what opposition has told us today. Firstly, they tell us that people can discern based on 3 pillars. Firstly, common sense. Secondly, discourse and discussion. And lastly, laws and fake news. Now, we recognize that this may be the 3 criteria which they base it off, but look at status quo. All these are already here in status quo today, yet nothing much has changed. Fake news is still existing on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, and whatnot. And we can see the prevalence of this through the spread of fake news before the 2016 US election. So we are kind of confused as to what side opposition is fighting for. They recognize that there is a problem with social media. They are not doing anything about it. They are just saying, oh, you know, what you're saying is wrong. We think that there's nothing substantive coming from their side. And then they tell us that we are not allowing for discourse. We're restricting social media and all that kind of things. We deny this assertion as we are simply regretting this dominant narrative that the motion states. What have we put to you today? We have told you today that we want to secure a healthy platform with which people can be secured balanced news. That is, and with a rebuttal, that is when they tell us that all these sorts of newspapers and traditional news sources are so biased towards the government, we think that they are being very naive about that when they're not looking at news sources such as Breitbart, CNN, which openly criticizes Trump, and even Sinchu Daily in Malaysia. We think these are the things that they have failed to recognize on their on-site opposition. So we have put to you today the direct and latent harms that fake news and echo chambers pose. That not everyone is open to discourse, especially people who are less educated. They are asserting a world in which people will be happy to go and talk to each other through Facebook and groups, and they will be open to change. This is not how the world works today, and we recognize this through the hate crime that's currently happening on social media. We know this through the white supremacist groups and movements that sprout out from social media, and we think that this is something that they have failed to recognize. They tell us of how social media can work for benefit through the Arab Spring. They don't recognize the negative impacts and movements that social media can also bring about, which is why I'm so proud to propose to this motion.
Thank you very much. In confirmed, hand in the room.